World Conspiracy. Nikola Nikolov. First chapter. Banks and Bankers. You know what, it can never be satisfied, the eye of greed, all world treasures cannot fill his desires. Persian wisdom. The banking system dates back to Babylon 3000. The reason for its discovery is gold. As for gold, holders were uncomfortable carrying the heavy one with them metal, they left it in the custody of a friend to whom trusted. He, in turn, gives them a piece of parchment or leather with his signature or seal. Later, anyone who presented this receipt of the guard may receive the gold. Over time, this system is becoming more popular. Special and increasingly qualified people become guardians of gold, and they begin to store treasures to most of the rich. In their trade transactions, the owners of gold later began to exchange these receipts, so it is not necessary to withdraw the gold from the guard. It just happens transfer and change of owner. In this way, the guard accumulate gold and jewels. Although the precious metal does not, it belongs to them, the guards begin to lend it to others, merchants who pay them a percentage for its use. Later, these jewel keepers became known as moneylenders. In the Middle Ages, usury was banned. A little more late, during the Crusades, incredibly much increased trade in Europe led to the creation of the former International Bank. Towards the middle of the 15th century, Cosimo de' Medici formed one international bank based in Florence. This is perhaps the first more sophisticated bank of the time, with branches in other Italian cities, such as Avignon and London. In the Roman, the bank's department keeps the Pope's accounts and assets. Interest, which the bank received, was 10%. In the 16th century, they were imported to Spain from South America huge amounts of gold, which gives the idea and opportunity for lending. During this century, the first modern ones were formed banks, some of which still exist today: Banco di Santo Spirito in Rome, Monte di Pieta in Naples, and Banco di Palermo in Sicily. These banks, which finance international trade, are accumulating incredible profits from interest and especially from the currency difference. The important phase in the development of banks occurs when they also start using other people's money, when they use their deposits, people's savings. They pay a minimum remuneration of importers and provide the same money to others, people, businesses and countries with much higher interest rates. They used all sorts of tricks that affect the names of banks. Some are called national banks, for greater persuasiveness and stability. The first such bank in 1674 took the name Sweden National Bank. It was followed by the Bank of England in 1694, when a group of merchants agreed to give £1,200 million borrowed from King William III with 8% interest. But other than that, they received the monopoly right to print banknotes and to accept deposits. Towards the middle of the 18th century, Rothschild really imposed a much more modern and sophisticated banking system. He sends their 5 sons in the financial capitals of Europe: Paris, Vienna, Naples, Frankfurt and London. Rothschild also created the fastest communication system through pigeons, couriers and their own agents. One of the most important factors for Rothschild's success is his extremely large political and economic intelligence. He was the first to learn about the victory at Waterloo, which gave him the opportunity through all sorts of commercial manipulations to accumulate huge wealth. His sons became private bankers internationally scale, financing railways, insurance companies and international projects. By this time, the Rothschilds already are the masters and teachers of international capitalism. Money is the god of our time, says the philosopher Heine, and Rothschild and his sons are his prophet. More than European countries and governments depended on the banks of Rothschild, especially the British. In 1847, the Rothschilds borrowed money of Ireland in connection with the Great Famine, financed the Crimean War and give England funds to buy half of the Suez Canal from Egypt in 1876. Led by Solomon Rothschild, Creditanstalt Bank in Vienna becomes the main deposit bank of Austria-Hungary. The British Bank of Rothschild funded the gold mines of South Africa. After the end of the Napoleonic Wars in 1815 to the beginning of the 20th century, London was the world's financial centre and the richest city. Wealth and money come to London from all over the world, as it was considered to be the safest and most lucrative place for investing money as well as borrowing. At this time, deposits in London banks are £120 million respectively against £40 million in New York, £13 million in Paris and £8 million in Germany. At that time, the bankers of London were most respected. Credit and trust are usually inherited from the father of son. Among the many bankers and merchants who settled in London, are the 2 sons of the famous German clothing merchant Johann Behring. One of his sons, Francis, was known as one of the great bankers of their time. After his death in 1910, wealth it is about £7 million. The Baring family as well. The Rothschilds had access to British rule they have financed many times. While the Rothschilds are oriented towards Europe, the Baring are heading for the New World, America. They financed the New York Bank in 1823, Louisiana and many more other states support American railroads and become the big American creditors. By 1880, Baring's income was less than that of Rothschild, but people's trust in their company is greater. The Baringos extended huge loans to Argentina, which by 1880 blooms incredibly fast economically and attracts a lot capital and emigrants from Europe. By 1890, however, the corrupt Argentine rule brings the country to a deplorable state. Any trust has been lost by importers. It's coming financial catastrophe and Baring fail. This crisis gives reflected around the world, but London suffered the most. Importers. Long ago, gold began to play a major role in the economic life of the state. The gold coating of money is very important. The value of the yellow metal is determined by the free market, i.e., from the principle of supply and buying. Now, however, the situation is quite different. The value of gold is no longer determined by the free market, but by the 5 largest world gold traders. Twice a day in London in the office of Rothschild & Sons, gather these 5 tycoons and determine the price of gold at which it will be sold and bought on that day. Since gold has been and is in very limited quantities, sea repositories are almost impossible to abuse. Everything invented by man can be very valuable and useful if used properly, but can also be monstrous. Many dishonest shopkeepers, even rulers, figured out how to do it are taking advantage of. There is a classic case of this between 1716 and 1722 in France. He started all the financial manipulations that are used and exist to this day. After the death of the Sun King, Louis XIV in 1715, France is completely bankrupt. This French king, unlike the others, it does not seek glory through wars. His dream is to remember his reign with splendor, to stand out as a leader of French classicism. He really manages to do that, raising an enormous amount of France's prestige in each attitude, not only as a political force, but also as one of the most cultural nations. However, he achieves all this at the cost of economic and financial ruin. After him the obligation of France is £3 billion, approximately as much today, francs. An Irishman convicted of murder manages to escape France and to convince the French government that it is able to save the French economy. At that time, private banks controlled the supply of the country with money in which the respective has been invested amount of gold. Gold was limited and it was not possible to more money is issued than the gold plating. An Irishman named Jean Lowe received by royal decree the exclusive right to supply the state with money. He puts in circulation more money than their actual gold coverage and thus in a short time pays off the obligations of the state. Everyone praises him as an economic genius, without being aware of what will follow. Most of the money he puts in circulation generally reduce the actual monetary value. The rulers, like Jean Lowe, are getting more involved and increasing banknotes, which leads to rising prices of goods, services and everything in general. As a consequence, inflation and economic crisis. Jean Lowe fled France and the country stopped this fake issuance of money. Another way people are harmed is gold and silver coins. As far as precious metals are concerned invested in coins of the same value, people are not harmed. But private banks and those who have had and still have a monopoly on money, they began to put in gold various impurities such as honey and other invaluable metals, which reduces the actual value of money and so on. Banks are getting rich at the expense of the people. The early Roman Empire practiced the same system. Their first coins contain 60% pure silver, then see the next 60 years in their currency there are only remnants of silver. They come into circulation and displace the former. Another way of inflation is caused when the state collect all gold and silver coins, replacing them with coins of very cheap metals such as copper, aluminum and others. That is the case in the United States under the Lyndon Johnson administration. The same is with the banknotes, which, like the coins, have no gold coating. The United States had a gold cover of its money until April 1933, when President Roosevelt ordered all Americans to surrender own gold and gold coins of the Federal Reserve, which them pays with paper banknotes. The law on unsold gold to banks provided for a $10,000 fine and 10 years in prison. After most of the gold was collected in the same year, President Roosevelt devalued the dollar, saying the state must buy the same gold from the Federal Reserve at higher prices. That is, the banknotes that people just have received have already depreciated by about 30%, and the so-called the Federal Reserve, with the help of the president, will in just 5 months won huge sums. It's the same with silver. Roosevelt doubles his value and his assistant and first friend Bernard Baruch, which controls 1/3 of the world's silver supply, makes extensive use of this service of the president. The motive is to support silver mines in America. Chairman of the Banking Committee in Congress Louis McFadden officially accuses the seizure of gold as an action, specifically prepared for the benefit of international bankers. As the congressman was authoritative and powerful enough to destroy this one deal, after 2 failed assassination attempts on the day of debates in Congress he falls to the chair and dies, presumably, from poisoning. It is not preferable to invest in gold since the state can always take it in a completely legal way. In USA, as in many other countries, there is a law that entitles to the state in case of need to collect the gold of the citizens. The state also has the power to challenge hyperinflation, putting into circulation an extraordinary number of books money. This was the case in Germany after the First World War. By printing a huge amount of banknotes, Germany is destroying the value of the brand. The main reason for this is imposed on them reparations of the Treaty of Versailles 269 billion gold marks, which were to be paid by 42 years' contributions. In 1923, the Reichsbank put 93 quintillions into circulation book stamps. This causes an astronomical increase market prices, 1 egg reaches 80 billion marks, and 1 kilogram of potatoes 100 billion marks. This terrible inflation also brought Hitler to power. The people in a very difficult situation, he is looking for some kind of salvation. Hitler, one of the candidates for power, promises to stop immediately inflation and that it will deal with the reparations imposed by the Treaty of Versailles. Hyperinflation in Germany has almost wiped out the class that is the majority. It supports Hitler's coming in power mostly because of his promises. At the turn of the century, the American worker paid very small taxes and lives almost without obligations. Now his taxes and debts are about 3/4 of his income. When there is talk of Americans and people in the West, the imagination is great. So was mine, so is most living in Eastern countries. However, the reality is different, much sadder. Everyone is fighting for overtime. Children work as news distributors from an early age or on agricultural farms. Pupils and students work and sustain themselves. I haven't met an American who isn't in debt for your car, for your house or on your credit cards. All this is due to the current monetary system. What actually is this system? Money is created by man. Something is created out of nothing. A piece of paper with almost no value is printed with different figures. It gives us the opportunity to buy a car, even a house, depending on the size of the printed digit. Those who create money, in fact, earn an incredible amount compared to the average American whose average profit or net income is about 5%, while the profit of money produces is unlimited. The cost of a banknote, paper and printing, of $1 or $10,000 is not more than 1 to 2 cents. The monetary system is not only absolutely necessary, but it is inconceivable for a civilized society to live without it. It would be impossible to develop any industry without money. Farms, individual families or a person would live strictly limited, would produce goods just for yourself. No one would produce more because there is nothing to do it. The functioning of any management would be unthinkable. Without the monetary system, we will have to return by the thousands years ago, and to live as individual tribes lived. Money is the potential of civilized society. If you make money remove or reduce circulation, the results would be catastrophic. Depression develops. Such a depression was created artificially in the United States in 1930 by bankers. During this time of the United States lacked nothing. The industry was at a very high level, there were fertile farms, a wonderful railway system, there was one of the best communication systems in the world using telephone, teletype, radio and very well functioning government, a postal system unaffected by military devastation. The only thing the United States lacked in the 1930s was the regular and sufficient supply of money needed for exchange and trade. Because the banks collect all the money and do not put it in circulation, all trade stops. Factories are not able to sell their products because the population has no money. The workers have been fired, the worst is happening, unemployment that the United States remembers. The answer and justification of the bankers had only one thing: times are hard and there is no money. Because people don't understand this exploitative system, they are left to be brutally robbed. There are thousands of farm properties expropriated by banks because farms are unable to repay the installments of the loans taken by them. Most of the people, they lose all their property and savings. The same banks that print the money themselves, but say no such, in just a few years, put billions into circulation dollars and prepare for World War II. In just a few years, the United States has gone from one extreme to the other, from unemployment and complete stagnation, to full capacity of military production. While farms cannot produce food for the population, factories began to produce in large quantities of military uniforms and ammunition. The sudden release of money in circulation changes lives radically. Farmers are beginning today sell their products, the factories organize the work of several shifts, the mines are triggered again. End of depression. The truth, it turns out, the lack of money caused by banks is caused depression. This and many other examples prove that money should be created and controlled only by the state, which only defends the interests of his subjects. In the United States, the opposite is true. Money is created and controlled by the Federal Reserve, which is nothing but one private organization.